Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for coming to our webinar on the importance of developmental relationships for youth experiencing homelessness. We have our awesome partners from the YMCA in San Diego, both Krista and Christina, who are going to share their expertise with us. Just wanted to say thank you to them, and then also thank you to all of you who are attending this. I know this is trying times for many of us out in the field. So again, just wanted to say thank you and giving you all props for the great work that you are doing on the ground level during this crisis. I also would like to remind people that if you do have any questions throughout this webinar, there is a question box or in the chat box. I'll be monitoring them in order to make sure that your questions are answered. So just please use the questions or chat box if you have any questions, and I will make sure that it gets answered. As well, there is a raise hand feature. Feel free to use the raise hand feature, and then I can unmute you if you would like to answer your question verbally. So we will do those questions at the end. And with that, I will turn it over to Krista and Christina.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Andrew. We're super happy to be here and bummed it's under these circumstances, of course, that we're all experiencing some pretty serious discomfort right now. But I think we all can agree in the work that we do that it's super important for us to remember that there are so many people, particularly young people, that don't have the option to stay at home. They can't simply just stay put and be somewhere safely. And so our work collectively is so much more important than it ever has been. So I'm really proud to do this work. I'm proud to be here with you all today. So we're going to talk a little bit about the importance of developmental relationships for young people experiencing homelessness, particularly young people who have experienced trauma, disconnection, loss, and it's really, we're going to talk a lot about a neuro-informed approach, and that really is just how we can understand where young people are neurologically, physiologically, biologically, and developmentally. But before we do that, we should probably introduce ourselves. I'm Krista Esquivel. I'm the Executive Director of the YMCA Youth and Family Services here in San Diego. We're a social service provider. We're connected to the YMCA of San Diego County, so that means we don't have a gym or a pool, but we are very much connected to other branches here in San Diego that do have those options. And at Youth and Family Services, we provide a large variety of services for folks throughout the county, under-resourced youth and families. We do child welfare work. We do mental and behavioral health services, school-based, community-based, for families, individuals. We have a residential treatment facility, and we have a ton of housing options. So we house about 250 young people annually, and those are young people who are exiting foster care and young people without any child welfare experience. We provide housing for families as well. And we do a lot of really great clinical interventions. So Christina, you want to talk a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, hi everybody. Hope everyone's well. My name's Christina Hallmy-Gillen. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist here in California. I've been with YMCA for about 15 years, and I've been doing clinical work for about 18 years, most of those with the YMCA. So I have really dedicated my clinical years to working with young people, those with intact families who may have needed some assistance with their functioning, adjusting, parental styles for teens versus, younger kids. And then I have also worked in residential with young ladies who were in transitional housing, exiting the foster care system, and then also with young people who have been homeless or insufficiently housed. So I enjoy this work. I enjoy working with Krista. Her and I have spent a lot of our brain energy in the past decade coming up with innovative approaches to working with young people, and also supporting our staff to work effectively with young people, because this work can be difficult. So we got to take care of our staff as well as taking care of the young adults out in the world. So we're happy to be here.
And really happy about this new collab that we did with National Network for Youth. We've worked really closely with Darla for many, many, many years, and with Andrew as well since he came on to NN4Y. And we had a lot of conversations about relationally responsive service provision, this idea of social capital being, so extremely important to the young people that we serve. And it being the work that we do being so much more about so much more than just the thing we do, right? We as service providers, we do street outreach work, we do housing, we do transitional housing, we do drop-in centers, we provide these services, but it has so much to do with the connections that we have with young people. And so, Christina and I have worked for about 10 years working on this idea of increasing relational competencies among the young people we serve, but at the same time supporting our staff to be able to create those really, really, really essential critical connections with young people so that they are engaged in our services and get the right dosage of our service. And we've been having those conversations with National Network about the power of relationships. And, Darla and Andrew just totally agreed. And they said, yes, this is so important. And so what should we do? Well, we should write a paper because that's what we do. How do we get this out? So we did. And National Network brought their policy experience and kind of this holistic frame around how we could have more meaningful dialogue about relationally responsive service provision. Do I leave anything out on that one, Andrew? I feel like it's kind of what happened, and that's how we got here.
No, I think you hit it right on. I think that's also, like, even from my own experience about like the work that I've done in my own clinical work as well, is like that connection really is almost like that moderating factor. It enhances some of the stuff that we do. So I would agree with everything you said.
Perfect. So moving right along, what are developmental relationships? I'm sure folks have heard a lot about them. Developmental relationships are really the relationships that all humans, but especially young people, need that nourish their growth and development. And so we can think about them as sort of like the roots of a tree. That relationships are the roots. They're in the ground. They're the thing that makes this tree strong and makes this tree grow. These relationships are connections with peers, with family, with parents, with teachers, mentors, coaches, anyone you can think of that it can wrap around a young person. It's not just about family. It has so much to do with peers. It has so much to do with other adults, other folks in a young person's life. And these relationships, when they're good, when they're healthy, they express care, they're reciprocal. Folks challenge one another's growth. You support and encourage and collaborate and share power. That's a really big piece of it. And really, these relationships help to expand future possibilities for young people. I think if you think about your life and where you are now, you most likely did not do that by yourself. So much of the opportunities that we have as we kind of move along in this complex environment that is life, they have to do with who we know, right? It's all who you know. And it's very, very, very true. Social capital is the idea that we can call upon these relationships in a way that helps us to get what we need, whether that's emotionally, whether that's financially, whether that's just a connection to a really great job opportunity. I mean, there are so many ways that these relationships help to lift up and support young people, kind of like this tree. TK, am I leaving anything out here on this description of what a developmental relationship actually is?
Well, so some of you may have heard of Search Institute, and they really talk about developmental relationships as having these features listed here on this slide. So the work that we've done is very much aligned with these qualities of developmental relationships, and we've particularly focus and talk a lot about what the nature of the relationship looks like. So we know what the features of these relationships, but how do you do the relationship? Because in our work, other than maybe family members, right, coming into contact with young people, there's a lot of boundaries out there. And so I think that we need to really be mindful and cognizant of how our boundaries are absolutely important to our ethical practices, but also sometimes how they may limit us from really connecting with some of the young people that we serve. And sometimes the boundaries are important also for, sustaining ourselves in this work. But how do you get the relationship so that you can express care, so that you can challenge growth and, expand opportunities? So when we think about relationships and our interactions with one another, it's always important to just kind of go back to basics, very basics, like back in the day basics when there were saber-toothed tigers and caves and mammoths, and just really remember that we are all, as human beings, hardwired to be social. It was really important to our survival, right, as a species, to live in groups. If we were alone out in the dangerous world, then we were less likely to survive. So this is, this living together and living in relationship and in community is essential to our survival. And things look, very different now. We've replaced saber-tooths with skyscrapers, I guess. And really at the root of it all, the same thing is true. We need people. We need people in our lives. And when we experience threat, whether or not it's a real true threat, or it's a perceived threat, our bodies respond the same way they did to the saber-tooth, and they will respond the same way now. And so when we experience threat, and sometimes that threat may be somebody's facial expression that gives us a signal that that they're not really sure about us, and then we know through those signals to back away. But we also know that our fight or flight system kicks on a little bit, because we need to figure out and assess, is this a safe environment? Is this a safe person, or a safe person to approach? So when we experience things like that, occasionally it's fine. It's fine on our systems. It's important, right? We need to be assessing for safety. But when we live in a heightened state of alertness and a heightened state of scanning the environment and stress and threat, then we are looking at some different complications and potential social disconnection, because we've deemed certain people or groups or environments to be unsafe, so we need to, avoid, or sometimes we get rejected from those spaces too. So we need to always be remembering that, right? A lot of times we talk about this in terms of trauma-informed care. Traumatic events or dangerous events have threatened some of these young folks that we work with, and they live in a heightened state of arousal, and living insufficiently leads them also to be living in survival mode, which is another chronic heightened state of arousal too. So, so this is So more, more to the living in a heightened state of arousal or chronic stress or toxic stress. We see this quite a bit. I know I've seen it quite a bit in my work, even now in some of our drop-in centers. We see young people coming to us hypervigilant and ready to really flee at any point, even though we are there to be of service and to help. And so when, these young people are living disconnected and they're living sort of on the fringes of other, social groups, there's risk of them experiencing loneliness, which we're learning more and more about, and the sort of dangers and toxicity that loneliness can bring. So it's really important that we remember these things, we approach cautiously, and that we're attuned to what these young people need so that we can help them not only with the services that we have to offer, but we can help just build a positive working relationship with them, so that they can have a different experience than maybe they've had with other folks in their lives. And when we experience a safe, mutually responsive relationship, we are actually increasing their resilience. And this, resilience is tremendously important. They are already so very resilient, but we can help with the development and really lay down some of those neural pathways so that they can continue to build those resiliencies and begin to take some other risks and begin to maybe engage in some of our services more and work towards some of the goals that they may have.
Yeah, okay. So when we talk about sort of the kind of science behind this, the science behind the power of relationships, or the science behind the power of social connection, we're really starting with the stress response. And for us at the YMCA, when we talk to our staff, when we talk to our funders, when we talk to our clients, we talk about the stress response, and we talk about really our first goal as service providers is to eliminate basic needs insecurity, and that's really what all of us do as a group, right? Everybody on this call right now, we eliminate this basic needs insecurity through providing housing, through providing essential needs, essential supplies, access to these physiological things that we all need to survive. When we think about folks who have been under-resourced for a really long period of time, we're talking about folks who have been exposed to chronic stress. So that's strong, frequent, prolonged exposure to adversity. This could be through poverty, right? Folks who experience poverty for even a short period of time have experienced chronic stress, not knowing if you're going to have a place to sleep, not knowing if you're going to have food that night, not knowing for a parent, not knowing if our children are going to be safe. That's extremely stressful. Any kind of physical, emotional abuse, chronic neglect, caregiver incapacities, such as parents with serious mental illness or substance misuse, exposure to violence, and kind of these accumulated burdens of family economic hardship, that is chronic stress. And it's likely that most of our clients have experienced that for periods of their lifetime, if not their entire lifetime. And so what that does is kick up the toxic stress response. And so as Christina was explaining, this prolonged exposure to this kind of stress activates stress response systems in any human, but it does it even more in the absence of protective relationships. Because when we can provide a calming buffer and some level of what's called co-regulation, and this is what we see if you've had a newborn, you've been around a newborn baby cries, we have no idea what's wrong with it, but the first thing we do is we pick it up and we rock it and we talk to it and we say everything's going to be okay. That is calming that stress response in that child so that we can figure out what that child needs. And that doesn't go away. we just stop picking up the baby because it's too big, because we think, you know, kids need to pull themselves up by their bootstraps, whatever silly kind of cliches we might think, but folks still need this calming and very warm and responsive interaction with another human being. That will calm that overactive stress response. And that overactive stress response can look like a lot of the things that we see when we work with these clients, right? That can look like what we call high risk activities. That can look like substance misuse. That can look like high risk sexual behaviors. That can look like a client telling you to F off and get out of my face. Those are, you know, overactive stress responses. And when we can come and calm those, we can do a lot better work with the thing that we're funded to do, right? If that makes sense. I'm going to kind of hold here because we've like put out a lot of information. And if there are questions or like hallelujahs or I don't know what you're talking about, feel free to put them in the chat right now. Like we love normally banter going back and forth. So if folks have anything, feel free to just like throw it right in the chat. So this what's called, you know, allostatic load. You're overly stressed. You have completely overloaded your nervous system. And any kind of maladaptive behaviors or things, coping skills, right? We can still call substance use a coping skill. We just might, it's just not the best one, right? It's not the one that's going to lead to success or to true stress reduction. But these are the things that can impact engagement in our services. And so when you have a client who's overly stressed and then they come into an environment that's unresponsive or doesn't come with this idea that we're going to calm them down or understand what's literally neurologically happening for them in their brains and their bodies, then we see low engagement and retention. We see young people who are going to be, you know, more reluctant to engage in our services. They're going to be more reluctant to see it through. And so that's a huge barrier in the work that we do when we're all here to end homelessness, right? End homelessness for young people. And when we have these really great interventions and innovations, if we don't have young people that want to engage in them and will remain engaged in them over the period of time that they need to be engaged in those, and really start to kind of calm themselves so they can start to make these truly physiological changes in their brain, then we're not going to get to our end goal, right? So TK, here, right. I love this. I love this, like such a great visual of like kind of what's actually happening in the brain.
So this is actually a photo of a mountain here in California, Mammoth Mountain, which is sadly closed this spring. I think I've had 2 trips that have been canceled. So I extra appreciate that I put this slide in today. But it's such a great photo because, you know, when we think about adolescents and young adults, they're growing and they're changing. And one of the biggest changes that we can't, you know, see ourselves with our own eyes is the changes that are going on in their brain. And they have this like really profound development process that's going on, a neurological process that's going on. And so, you know, when you look at this image, there are these trails and pathways coming down, right? So imagine that this is like a brain where we have all of these pathways that are laid down in our own brains. So as we come into adulthood, you know, one of the major tasks, right, is that we connect with peers in order to form our own identities, decide what our values are, what, you know, drives us, and then also to start identifying goals, you know, that we'd like to achieve as adults. Maybe these are career aspirations or you know, familial aspirations or what have you. When the system's burdened, the pathways that laid down will be oriented to survival. When these young people come to us, when we're warm and responsive, when our environments are safe and secure, and we engage with them in a responsive way, we have the ability to model for them and to sometimes explicitly teach them self-regulation skills. And so some of these maybe maladaptive pathways can fall off as new, more adaptive pathways are laid down. And if they can engage and we can retain them, we have more time and opportunity to really practice with them, have them make mistakes, trip and fall, and come back and know that it's safe, it's non-judgmental, we're still here with you. And then these pathways just get laid down more and more, become more sort of entrenched in a positive way. And then, you know, we can hopefully, best case, right, is change their trajectories a bit so they can start moving in a direction that is more sustainable, healthful, and ultimately fulfilling for themselves. Side note, I hate that chairlift. It's scary and it's steep. You can't really tell. So I also like this photo because I have some messed up pathways that are laid down in my brain when it comes to this particular chair that I'm working through still. So there's my self-disclosure.
Well, I think we all have this, right? I think we can see this in the way that we respond to stress. And, you know, we have a whole training based on some of these tenets, and one of the core pieces is mindfulness. And so one of the reasons that mindfulness is so successful from a scientific standpoint is that it helps people to rewire their brains when they're dealing with stress. It helps people make different actually choices in the way that they respond to stress. And that's really what we're trying to do, is model this kind of behavior and create these spaces so that young people have the opportunity to try something different to help kind of calm those overactive brains of theirs, and really think through what might be different emotional, cognitive, and behavioral ways to respond to that stress. As part of our work with National Network, we really set out to give some like very clear strategies to direct service providers about how to start thinking about relationally responsive care and to adopt this kind of neuro-informed approach into their work. And we're going to talk through what those are right now. So clinical staff and outreach and housing. So we're talking about licensed therapists, licensed social workers being involved in those programs. We're talking about the peer-to-peer approach, and so making sure that we hire folks with lived experience and shared life experience, and actually really engage them in the work in a super meaningful way. We'll, of course, talk about trauma-informed care. I don't think that's new to anyone. We'll talk through buffering and co-regulation. We really think this is kind of the like crux of it. And this actually is free, so it doesn't require any additional funding for you to be able to do this and get your staff up to speed there. We'll talk a little bit about family finding and reunification when safe and appropriate, and of course, self-regulation development. And again, that's the other piece that we think is the most important part to moving young people along this pathway here, this continuum, to help them get to a place of real health, both mentally, emotionally, cognitively, and behaviorally. I don't think I'm leaving anything out here. No. We'll just get right into this. So in talking about using clinical staff flexibly, one of the things that we've been able to do at the YMCA here in San Diego is, okay, so we all know clinicians are expensive. Christina, I'm talking about you. Andrew, I'm talking about you, right? When we have clinicians on our staff, they cost more, and they should. You guys are worth everything in the world. You're so valuable. You've been trained formally. You've gone through licensure. You've passed, tests, and you probably have a lot of student loans. And you are valuable. You're extremely valuable. And so in order to, we all know, particularly our federal funding sources, they will not support this level of staff member usually, just because there's not enough money. And so what we really try to do is diversify our clinical staff among our funding sources. So we have some state funding, we have some local funding, we have some federal funding, and they're all kind of serving that same population and that same group. And we know we have to usually diversify those because there's usually no one funding source that's enough to do what really needs to happen. So we have those staff paid. So we might have, at the Y we have many clinicians, but we might have 2 clinicians that are funded out of 7 different contracts. So they're split amongst all of those contracts to be sure that we can pay for the whole, and then that one person divides their time amongst those teams, amongst those populations, amongst those clients, to be able to really provide some heavy support. We also include clinicians in our outreach team. So our outreach team, our street outreach team that goes out on the streets every day, has a clinician with them. Or they're an intern, because interns are fabulous and they're cheaper. And they're learning, and they bring you, new information as they're learning. And so interns are really, really wonderful, and they're a bit less expensive. And then, of course, we support our teams who are not clinicians to learn everything they possibly can clinically, so that they have a more well-rounded approach and understanding. So we have a clinical director that's also our director of training and education, who does 2 trainings every single month. Those could be on things like de-escalation, or very specific things like motivational interviewing, or dialectical behavior therapy. This clinician does those trainings, twice a month. Staff love it, and it fills up their toolbox, so they have more tools when they're working with these groups of young people. Any questions here on this part? Getting into the details.
If I could just add quickly that, interns are great. Sometimes they take a little bit more work because, they're required maybe supervision. Supervisors aren't cheap either. But I will say that if we have interns available to us, we have a really great opportunity also to sort of train them, on the road training, so that they become specialized in working with this population, and they can then take all of that information and grow up with it, so that they hopefully there's a whole army of clinicians out there who are specialized, who can hopefully one day advocate and really work to engage this population in a very specific way, because I really believe that this is a specialty, and not a lot of people understand it or have the experience in this work. And I think it's incredibly valuable, specialty within all the clinical professions.
Yeah, and there was a comment. Stacy commented that, there are some social workers that get their master's in licenses, to avoid some of this client time, and to not do as much direct service. And makes a comment about change, right, and how this has to do a lot with the licensing and the licensing structure. And if we change the licensing structure, this will change. And I do have a little bit of a comment on that. I think Christina brought it up, that it is a specialty. So I think you're right. I think there are some license level clinicians who, they do want to open up their own private practice, and they might not want to do the on the ground work that working with homeless young people. Except for, in my experience, is that there is a group of us that really do want to do this passionately, and it is a specialty, right? So who are those in our community that really want to expand our clinical work with that? And I do have to say, when I was supervising I was supervising a drop-in center in Pennsylvania, and we did have a clinician on staff, and like I remember we had 4 clinicians that like cycled through, and the first clinician was like, you know, this is not for me, right? And I think that's and for some clinicians that won't be, and like how do we then like encourage the ones who do want to be part of this and build up those skills. I'm sorry, I kind of went off a little tangent, but just trying to
no, you're totally right. Yeah, and Stacey, you're right too. California's got a licensing standard that's pretty gnarly, and you know, I think it's important to think about what Christina was saying also. And when we have interns, you can like grow them to want to do this specialty, and then you'll see at the end of this webinar, there's a really big piece about paying folks what they need to make. And that's the other thing that I know we've been able to do, is that we actually use our discretionary and philanthropic funding to help get the right clinicians and pay them what they're worth, because we want them to stay. And many of them don't want to go do private practice, but they do because that's how you can make a living, right? You can't keep paying a clinician $16 an hour or $18 an hour to do this work with their level of education and formal training. It's not responsible, right? So we find ways to kind of work through that and work with it so that we have what we need and the right people. Andrew, you bring up an excellent point. It is about having the right folks. And there are many who are not right. And again, going back to interns, if you get to grow them yourself, you get time with them, you get to understand what their passions are, what their expertise is, what their specialty is, then it's a different kind of relationship, right? And when we talk about these relationships we have with our clients, we have those kinds of relationships with our teams. Our connection to and with the people that we work with is just as important as the relationships we have with our clients, and help us to better understand who should do this work. And then you figure out your value. I mean, there's people that work at the YMCA that do clinical work that make a really great living, and they should, and they always will, right? There's relationships formed there, and we know that they're really good at what they do. So we will find ways to continue to keep paying for them. And speaking of pay, we're going to talk a little bit about the peer-to-peer approach. And are there any other comments? I couldn't see Stacey's comment when it came through, Andrew. So if any of them jump in, just because I can't see them. I'm looking at the chat, but I didn't see that one. I don't know why I can't see it.
Yeah,
technology.
There is a hand raised from Foster. So Foster, I'm going to unmute you if you have a question to ask. Hello, Foster, can you hear us? And if so, you're unmuted and can ask your question since I see your hand raised. That might have been an accident, so I will place you back. If you do have any questions, feel free to put that in the question box.
Great. So one of the other recommendations is to work with young people with lived experience and get them on your staff team. Embrace and support their expertise, because there is no better expert than a young person who has been through this. And we have worked really hard to be sure that we can pay living wages, if not more, because their expertise is so valuable. And so many of them are just so excited to be part of changing someone else's life after they've been through what they've been through. And you know, lastly, really listening and acting on what they say. I think we've probably all experienced, and we're probably all familiar with this sort of like idea of tokenism here. And we say like, oh yeah, we have young people, blah, 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 but we don't really listen to them. We have to. the best ideas come from them, the most heartfelt, vulnerable, and real descriptions of what this feels like comes from them. And they are better at engaging with young people than anybody else. Most of our clients clearly connect more quickly and easily with a young person who has shared life experience. Am I forgetting anything here, Christina?
No, I think, we have been incorporating intentionally, at least, young people with shared life experience for about 10 years now. And, there have been some really wonderful and successful experiences. And we've had a few that haven't been all that successful, but we learned a lot from those experiences. So the only thing I would add here is, making sure that when a young person with shared life experience wants to come and work right in this type of these types of programs, is just making sure that they're kind of in a place that is stable enough for them to be able to maintain themselves emotionally and psychologically, because I would say that when somebody is very close to still very close to being in that survival mode, that sometimes this work can be difficult for them because they're still working through a lot of their own things. So just a caution there, and something to be aware of as managers and team members. But otherwise, yes, they add a tremendous value.
Mm-hmm.
So in terms of trauma-informed care, or TIC, as we see it all the time, it's everywhere, and it's everywhere because it's important. And I think that it is, an area of our work that has evolved a lot and is continuing to evolve. And so we need to always be paying attention to our new understandings, what the research is revealing, what people's practices are revealing, and where emerging and best practices will take us, because we can't just get stuck in what we thought worked 5 years ago and then just do that for the next 25 years. So, paying attention to all of that is really critical. And then again, folding in the stories and the expertise and the experiences of folks with shared life experience, whether those are young people that are working on your teams or the people that you're serving, is really important to get their feedback, because they just have an incredibly unique perspective, and they can talk about what's been quote unquote done to them by well-meaning, program staff and sometimes clinicians, and sometimes we mess up. And so we need to be able to hear them. We need to put our own egos aside sometimes to make sure that we're really listening and understanding. And then when we get all of this information, right, like anecdotal information as well as what research is telling us, we really need to form our own internal policies that really create a trauma-informed space, as well as really advocate to legislators, to funders, about how we know that programs need to be designed, as well as how funding needs to be allocated, because this is, I don't know how we did this work before trauma and care existed. I don't even know what they called it, but I feel like there was a big giant hole within all of the work if we weren't paying attention to this. So, it is important. I think we're getting to a point sometimes where people are like, trauma-informed care, I know about it, but we can't get fatigued on this. We just have to stick with it and stay abreast of what's new.
And it really is that sort of, oh, go ahead, Andrew, you go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say that, I also think it links back to building the trust and building those relationships, that without the trauma-informed care and not having that in place in your agency, it's going to be so much harder to be able to reach, be able to form those those relationships and build that trust, right? Like, and I definitely have seen like a huge difference, like from I was in care in the 1990s, living in congregate care, and like how things were done in the 90s compared to what they're done now, it's right. I think going back to what you were talking about, Christina, is it's like, yeah, people didn't really follow trauma-informed care. It was very this top-down approach. Listen to me, and because if you listen to me, I will. I know how you can just pull yourself up from your bootstraps and just follow my advice, and you'll get over it. And like that, you know, that's not. We know that that's not effective, right? And like, so those are the things that like I think like when we say like why they're so important, right? And being able to listen to young people. And I think like Daniela had a question, right? Like regarding like you know, for places that don't have like formal intern or formal licensed clinicians, she expressed that like interns will be hard in her program because they don't have licensed clinicians, so interns wouldn't apply. So, but there are some things that agencies can do, like trauma-informed care, being able to have a youth action board, and it's all about building that trust, building that relationship with the people you serve. Sorry, Krista.
No, that's beautiful. Oh my gosh, we couldn't say it any better. It's really, and trauma-informed care is really sort of like the foundation, right? There's so much that goes on top of that. But if we're forgetting, right, because we're fatigued about this, or we're just like, yeah, we're trauma-informed, we're trauma-informed. If you can't answer if I ask the question, how are you trauma-informed? If you can't answer that, then you need to go back and review your policies. You need to go back and retrain or reassess how trauma-informed care looks for you and your agency. And then, of course, asking and listening to folks with lived experience. They will tell you if you are trauma-informed care, if you're trauma-informed or not. They will absolutely tell you. And they'll do it anonymously, and they'll do it in person, and they'll do it by survey and by interview if you give them that opportunity. So that's extremely important. The other really important piece, and TK, if you want to take this, is the buffering and the co-regulation. This sort of takes trauma-informed care to the next level.
Right. So we were talking before the webinar started with Andrew about living in Chicago and how it's a wonderful city for us to visit, but it's quite cold during the winters. And you know, we have thin skin in California here. So if we imagine winter Chicago, right, and some really cold, blizzardy, bleak kind of weather events going on, we have jackets, big, nice, protective jackets. And so if you think about buffering like a jacket, it protects us from the immediate stressor or hardship that we're having to endure. So we can offer that. And I know, you know, every program budget is different, but many programs can afford some immediate assistance that serves as a buffer. So if we can get somebody with a hotel voucher into housing, then that is a protective buffer. Or if we can provide you know, warm meal, that's another buffer. So think of the buffering as the immediate action or item that can protect from the immediate stress. Then once you get that jacket on, if you can go into a protective space that is relationship, so a protective relational space with somebody, and that person can help through action, through talk, bring down the other person's nervous system. That is what co-regulation is. So if I attune to you and I recognize that you're in a heightened state of stress, arousal, grief, loss, pain, whatever it is, I can use my being, right, or my own nervous system to help you calm yours down. And a lot of that is with validation, with the, reducing maybe like stimuli in the environment. But these small actions are ways that we can co-regulate each other. And it's so important that we are able to do this with the young people we're serving, because they don't get to enjoy like a relaxed nervous system very often, because they're used to living in, chronic stress and toxic stress. So Krista had mentioned before that this is something that's free. This does not cost like a clinician. This doesn't cost like, extra facilities. This is just a matter of learning, understanding, and training and working with staff and supervisors, in a feedback loop to make sure that there is buffering and co-regulation going on. I'll also add, as a supervisor, that oftentimes I have to do this for the people that I supervise. So it's not just something we're doing to the young adults, but we're doing it with each other in this work. We're doing it with the staff that we're training, who are out there doing that upfront work. So I don't know if you want to add more, Krista.
Yeah, I mean, co-regulation and buffering for us are such a huge piece of our work, no matter what we're funded to do. And we do actually have a training that is extremely low cost. It's called CAAVE, CAAVE, and we've got a website, so I can put it in the chat here in a bit. But really low cost virtual option as a way to help provide a nice kind of framework around how to do the co-regulation and buffering piece, and of course focus on self-regulation as well. So yeah, I mean, it's free. It's essentially free. It is not as costly as some of the other things that we've talked about. One of the other pieces that we think is really important from a neuro-informed and developmental relationship perspective is to try our best to incorporate family finding and family reunification programs into our work. So in child welfare, this is extremely common. The evidence base comes from the child welfare world, and there's a lot of evidence about the efficacy of these types of programs, of course, only when it is safe and appropriate to do so with not just biological family, but also folks that a young person could identify from throughout their time frame that were these really like safe, warm, and responsive maybe adults that they may have known. Maybe it was like auntie or mom's best friend, or dad's, military buddy, somebody in their life that they knew was a safe place for them. And this family finding work can at least give them that connection. So we have family finding programs both in child welfare and for young people experiencing homelessness. And our state has invested in that, and our local community has invested in that work as well. So we're trying to build the evidence base around this work with young people who are not child welfare involved. And it's interesting because we know that young people that have experienced homelessness are oftentimes very similar to those who are in child welfare. These are just young people who didn't get picked up by the system, perhaps. Or who were savvy, right, and knew that they needed to stay out of the system, perhaps. But when we can find someone that they love or that made them safe when they were a child, we can start to create organic connections that will then persist after we're gone. And that is a really big piece of our work as well. So, again, we've seen some really great progress with this. It can be funded at the local level. We're looking into ways to fund it from the federal level. And this kind of falls into the diversion category. If you think about it like that from a COC perspective, the prevention and diversion category, if we could find a place, if one of these connections could actually turn into what they call in the child welfare world as a placement, that could divert a young person from homelessness or instability because they've now been connected. And if we can support them and that family that they might be with, well, that's a win-win, right? Young person gets to be with people that they know care about them. They get to be connected, and it's cheaper than anything that we would do to provide housing in the first place. So it's an interesting piece that we think is really important here as we move forward. And again, associated with that neuro informed approach, because again, those connections reduce stress and they help young people build their self-regulation skills, which is, I think, the last of our recommendations here. Self-regulation skills, you probably know what they are. You probably heard of them. Executive functioning, willpower, all of those are self-regulation. Self-regulation is extremely important. It is the foundation for our functioning. I'm regulating right now. You're regulating right now. Listening, sitting passively on a webinar for this whole time, you have been regulating this entire time. And what we know about young people, because of this really profound period of brain development that's happening during adolescence and young adulthood, it's super responsive to intervention. It is like literacy. The way that someone can learn to read, someone can learn to increase their self-regulation skills. And there's a really big growing evidence base around programs that we can lay on top of the work that we do that helps to do that. But one of the things is co-regulation. We need co-regulation and we need buffering to increase our self-regulation skills. And so by doing that, we help to increase regulation skills among our clients. And that is hands down one of the best things we can do, one of the best things we can give them for their future functioning in adulthood. We talked a bit about relationally responsive care and the CAVE training that we have. It is based on an approach that we developed through a demonstration project with Administration for Children and Families and the Children's Bureau. We started that work about 10 years ago and have found some really, really, really great outcomes. Taking compassion, awareness, acceptance, validation, and empowerment, and layering that on top of this trauma-informed care idea has really, really, really been successful in connecting and engaging with young people. And then Andrew and Darla had some great macro level policy recommendations. And Andrew, I don't know if you want to take this slide and
Sure.
talk through what those are.
Yeah, I think a lot of the policy recommendations, right? Like I think we, like what was described, like what are the things that work, right? Like so some of the ideas that, like, at least from the national network's perspective, some of the things that we want to push is, like, one, require providers to include specific elements in their contracts or in funding, right? So like if family finding is something that we value and we want to connect young people into their connect with their chosen family, whoever that may be, then those are things that should be written into contracts, into funding proposals, so that way it becomes something that we do. So these relational aspects become normal, right? Or normalize in the funding. The other thing would be like providing funding for training and technical assistance to build capacity, right? Like I think like some of like Daniela mentioned that, like, we don't have on-site like clinicians. So what do we do, right? So like making sure that if we as a society are valuing this, then making sure that those are seen through our technical assistance and training. So that way we're building capacity for all of our programs that are out there. And then also direct funding, right? Like I think like now, right, more than ever, it is like with the crisis that's going on now, that we're seeing that, like, yeah, when there is a need, we need to provide funding and direct funding for certain positions. How can we continue that beyond this? Like, we know that like young people need these certain elements. How do we make sure that every program has a clinician on staff? How do we make sure that like that there's funding for that, right? So all of that are just like some of the basic like things, advocacy items that we would like to push forward, because we know that this is a huge thing, that it can make a huge difference on the lives of young people. So I know like this was primarily a practice webinar, but some of these like concrete items can definitely concrete advocacy and policy items can definitely be used by anyone in making sure that we're advocating at every level to ensure that these items are present. And I think,
and being like
go for it.
Clear, right? I mean, I think you're like super clear when we say like we need more funding to serve more youth, and in this way. Just add more to that argument that you all are making on our behalf. But of course, when we're doing that kind of advocacy work at both the federal, state, and the local level, that we're able to talk about like what are those elements, and there's evidence behind it. So I think these are all really important.
And with that, we're right at 2 o'clock. So if there are any remaining questions, there are no questions, at least any new ones here. But if there are any questions, we can stay on for a minute or two more. And wanted to say thank you to Christina and Krista for the wonderful insight you provided to everyone. I think this is extremely valuable as we move forward when we talk about relationships, or in child welfare they call permanency, right? So as we keep going, keep pushing for this and keep advocating for our young people, having relational elements in our programs are going to be essential. So with that, I want to say thank you to everyone who attended, and thank you both Krista and Christina.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for having us.
Thank you all.
Great.
Have a great
Wonderful
day.
opportunity.
Yeah, thank
Stay
you.
safe.
Yep.
Okay.